Margaret Brennan at the White House. Margaret, I know that President Trump spoke earlier today. Can you tell us what the White House reaction has been and what the timeline has been as far as when the White House found out about this event in Vegas?
Well, the president made those remarks from the diplomatic room here at the White House, and really the White House wants them to carry the day. In other words, they are shutting down all other press events that had been scheduled. And the president's comments, ones that he really characterized in an uplifting tone, talking about unity, talking about communities coming together, and really emphasizing spiritually themed, religiously themed language throughout his remarks today. They were scripted. He read from a teleprompter. We know his speechwriter, Stephen Miller, was in that room with him, as was Chief of Staff John Kelly. And it is John Kelly who has really, in many ways, been the president's first point of contact on this, because it was the Chief of Staff, the former head of Homeland Security, remember, John Kelly, who first informed the president in those early morning hours when the attack occurred. And that's interesting because it's often the president's counterterrorism and Homeland Security advisor who would have delivered that message. In this case, it was John Kelly, perhaps fittingly because of his prior role, who conveyed word. So we know the president had been up throughout the morning. We saw the lights on here in the residence when we came in when it was still dark out. And it was the communications shop that decided they would not issue any kind of comment until about 7 a.m. Eastern time. That's when you saw the first presidential tweet, and it was very carefully worded. When the president took the podium, he also chose his words carefully. He did not ascribe a motive, he did not describe the shooter, and he did not characterize this as domestic terrorism or anything other, simply framing it as a tragedy.
Seems like a much more measured response than we've seen in previous attacks. And he says he's going to be going to Las Vegas now on Wednesday. How important is that visit?
Well, the president often likes to be the one conveying the news and to be the one on the ground, because he thinks that sends a message to the American people. He has repeatedly emphasized, remember, that tomorrow he's going to Puerto Rico. Wait, I'll be there soon, he said in his tweets. It was important for him to be on the ground in Las Vegas quickly to respond and to be there to try to be that sort of consoler in chief that America has come to expect from our leaders in recent years, because these mass tragedies, these shootings have become, in some way, events that White Houses know it's a matter of if not when they will happen on their watch. This is the first of this scale on President Trump's young presidency, and it is the largest mass shooting in U.S. history. So it is just a matter of time, perhaps by the time we get to Wednesday, that debate, that conversation about being prescriptive, finding a way to prevent a future tragedy will once again bubble up. But for today, the White House wants to focus on the victims and unity. And it's interesting that you heard the president say that again today, because just the past few days, over this weekend in particular, he took a lot of heat for appearing to divide people rather than unite them to respond to the tragedy in Puerto Rico, which is still something that this White House and that Homeland Security team is focused on trying to help recover from.
Yeah, and of course the president is still scheduled to visit Puerto Rico and the devastation there on Tuesday. There seems to be an elephant in the room, if you will, that officials have thus far been staying away from. Of course, it's only about 11 hours since the attack, but the debate will eventually turn to gun control, and that debate is already being had on social media. The president did not mention the weaponry used, which sounded like a fully automatic weapon. Do we have a sense of how the White House plans to respond to this issue?
Well, throughout the morning, you've heard White House officials emphasize that this is a state and local authority response. They are letting the people on the ground be the first responders there, though the FBI and ATF are assisting with that. One of the reasons you hear that emphasis is because it is a sensitive point, one that Homeland Security, certainly Chief of Staff John Kelly, has emphasized repeatedly, which is we don't want to overstep at the federal level. We want the locals to respond first. And And perhaps that is also allowing them to stay away from characterizing things before that investigation comes to its own conclusions. That is some restraint on the president's part, because we know when it comes to attacks that appear to have ties to international terrorist groups, he has not minced words and he has been very direct. On the domestic front, this gets more complicated politically because of all the same familiar conversations we've had in the wake of every mass shooting, whether it was Sandy Hook or whether the one we'll have in the wake of Las Vegas. But what we know is that President Trump's own views on gun control have evolved, so to speak. Back in 2000, he was on the record talking about, he wanted full protection of the Second Amendment, but was open to some control of automatic weapons. Since that time, he has really portrayed himself and campaigned as a good friend of the NRA and has seemingly reined in that opinion. We'll see where he ends up in the wake of this. But for today, the White House wants the response to be on the victims.
Margaret Brennan with the White House response to this deadly shooting. Margaret, thank you.